Yes.
Okay, good. There you go. We're back.
Okay.
So, what are we talking about this week?
Well, we said we would talk about Hollywood, or movies about movies, films about films.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a subject that interests me for one reason or for many reasons. But when I was a kid, one of the things I heard, and I've heard it virtually all my life periodically, is that Hollywood is able to make insightful movies about virtually every subject but itself.
It's true.
And it's considered sort of received wisdom that no one has absolutely challenged. Of course, there are films that are more insightful, that are classics, like Sunset Boulevard, for instance. Nobody disputes that. But frequently they'll say it's really not about the industry. It's sort of the mummifying of a specific star or a series of stars from a certain period.
Yeah. It's not directly about the industry.
No.
Yeah.
Most of the films that Hollywood makes about itself usually are not, but there are exceptions, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I did was, because my memory is going as I stand here, is I made a list of films so that we could talk about them. You've seen any number of them. I even broke them down into certain categories. Cool. And so what I'll do is I'll read off the list first. Then we'll go back. Okay? And then we'll take titles and we'll elaborate on them if we can. Okay. And if not, I've seen all the pictures.
Yes.
So,
and I haven't seen all of them.
No, that's one of the reasons. And for people listening or viewing, they haven't either, but they might be interested enough.
Right.
So, Hollywood on Hollywood. This is what the category I put it. Yes. The Bad and the Beautiful. Mm-hmm. A Star is Born. Judy Garland's version, the 1954 version.
Okay.
There's also two others. This is a remake of a remake of a remake. Okay? The initial film was called What Price Hollywood, which is more directly to the subject matter.
Yeah.
The second was called A Star is Born. Okay. That was with Jeanette Gaynor and Frederick March. And then Judy Garland did it. And then they moved it to the music industry. Mm-hmm. And Barbara Streisand did it with Chris Christopherson. Mm-hmm. And now they're talking about making it again.
Yeah.
This time the initial talk, it's not going to happen this way, was Beyonce playing the role Judy Garland played and Jeanette Gaynor played, and Clint Eastwood directing.
And Tom Cruise was attached at one time.
At one point to play the destructive star.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, I thought it might have been an interesting challenge for him.
Oh, yeah.
It's an interesting role.
Yeah.
It probably is the most interesting.
He was the only
role.
right part of that. Like, the only good part of that, I'm like, Clint Eastwood and Beyonce? But I'm like, Tom Cruise. Okay, I can see that, you know.
Okay. One of my favorites, and it's not necessarily a great movie, is Inside Daisy Clover.
Okay.
I'll talk about that later on. The Big Knife, which is like a poison pen letter to Hollywood. Yeah. The Last Tycoon, another flawed film from an unfinished novel.
Right.
That's by Scott Fitzgerald. Sunset Boulevard, we mentioned before. Mm-hmm. Maybe the best Hollywood film on Hollywood, Singing in the Rain.
Okay.
And there's one that a lot of people haven't heard of. It's called The Star, and it stars Betty Davis. Mm-hmm. And it was made in the early 50s, and it's an interesting film. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then films about the early days.
You'd want to... Wait, am I mistaken? All About Eve kind of touches on that.
Absolutely, right. It's more stage. All About Eve is the stage thing. It uses a lot of movie stars playing stage performers, so it wouldn't fit. It is really, in some way, the stage version of The Bad and the Beautiful.
That makes sense.
In its own way, it could work as a bookend for that.
Right.
One has nothing to do with the other. They're two separate writers to everything. Okay, so then I listed actually two, and you might know more, about the early days of filmmaking when they left the studio environs. One is Nickelodeon, Peter Bogdanovich's. That's his Valentine to the old days. And Hearts of the West, which we talked about last week.
One of my favorite movies.
Yes, I want you to elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Then Hollywood Abroad, that's where Hollywood sends, because once they got to the point where they were going on location, Hollywood Abroad, they made films about that. 2 Weeks in Another Town, the film from Irwin Shaw's. Yeah, Irving Shaw's novel. And in a way serves as a bookend also.
Yeah.
Or
a sequel.
Yeah, in quotes, to The Bad and the Beautiful.
Right.
Okay, and then The Stuntman, which we all love.
Great.
Because of Peter O'Toole's incredible performance.
One of the best director characters
ever portrayed in cinema.
Yeah.
Period. I put modern times, and we're not talking today, but the last 25 years. The Player. And Hollywoodland in an odd way, because it should really go under bios.
Okay.
Because it's George Reeves. George Reeves was the man who played Superman. Prior to Christopher Reeve, he played Superman when it was a television show.
Right.
And an episodic theatrical serial.
Yeah.
And the reason I put it under the Hollywood films is because the tone is contemporary for one thing, and two, it elaborates somewhat on the studio politics, which is something that George Reeves could never penetrate, which would have gotten him better roles. I mean, his best role was From Here to Eternity. He was also in Gone with the Wind, curiously enough, but his fame came from being Superman, which frustrated him. So that's the reason I put it there. Then there may be, 100 biofilms on stars. One of the best ones, because he was such an interesting actor himself, is The Man of a Thousand Faces, the bio of, what's his name, Lon Chaney Sr. And he's played wonderfully by James Cagney, of all people. You wouldn't think James Cagney would be right for it, but it works. And then I put independent, and these are independent films about making independent movies.
Right.
One is Someone to Love, Henry Jaglom's film, which is really interesting, and it's Orson Welles' last performance in a movie, and it's quite heartwarming, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a good film too.
Hollywood Dreams is one of his others, of course. He also has Queen of the Lot. So you have 3 by Henry Jaglom, and for anyone who's never seen a Henry Jaglom film, I would recommend it. I think he does really individual work. And in these 3 films that I mentioned, he is actually talking about the process of being an independent filmmaker.
This is not a completely accurate comparison, but he's almost like Woody Allen, if Woody Allen was even the more independent Woody Allen.
Yes.
The more edgy Woody Allen.
Right, yes. And then the other one I have is Tom DeCilio's film called Living in Oblivion.
Which I've never seen. I know that's really, I need to see it,
It's sort of, I would call it almost a cult film about the making of independent movies. Okay. Then the foreign films. I only list 2. One is Godard's Contempt. He's made other films about the process of filmmaking. And then there is his friend, Truffaut's Valentine to Hollywood filmmaking.
Day for Night,
right. And so those are some of the films I listed. I also listed...
I want to add one to the foreign films, which I think in the most bizarre way may be one of the ultimate movies about movie making. 8.5.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Oh, when did I...
It's filmmaking as a fever dream.
Absolutely. Why didn't I think of it?
I don't know, because I didn't think of it till now. And then you're going through your list, and I go, 8.5 is one of the ultimate movies about movies.
The reason I suspect I didn't think of it, or you didn't think of it, is because it transcends it.
Yeah.
It's such a great film.
It's far better,
Yes, it transcends its subject matter, and it becomes something else in our minds. But you're totally right. Of all the pictures I mentioned here, that is the quintessential film about filmmaking.
Probably,
Thank you. That's great.
And it's just because he's just following, it's a director just following, if you haven't seen it, almost just his stream of consciousness.
Absolutely. And he takes in everything from the critics' potential critique of what he's doing to all the bother of placating stars' egos, actors' egos, producers' uncertainties and anxieties, and the directors having... Actually, the whole thing is about the director having a creative block. And then also, what we talk about, when we say the auteur theory, we always say that the director brings his own intellectual sensibility to whatever the work is at hand. And so in the character of what's the character's name? Guido.
Yeah.
Guido. That character, he brings in his autobiography, which has to inform the film. So that really is the ultimate of all the films made about films that one can think of.
Yes,
Yeah, no.
I think so, or one of them. But following that, I mentioned Woody Allen.
Yes.
He's also made a few.
Yes.
Because he made
Stardust.
His 8.5 inspired movie
Right.
is Stardust Memories,
Yes.
right? Which is one of his weirdest and one of his most, I think, disliked pictures. But I think it's
one of his
movie.
favorite.
Right. Yeah. Well, you always like your ugliest child,
Of course.
right?
Of course.
And then the other one, this is not a good movie, but he just to say he has made more films about it because he made that movie Hollywood Ending, which is about a blind director, which is a funny concept, but it just doesn't completely come off. Another one on there that I was thinking of is David Mamet's State and
Yes,
Maid.
I thought of that one. Closer to that, what's the one that Robert De Niro did based on the memoirs of a director?
You're talking about Guilty by Suspicion?
No, that is interesting.
Oh,
on
you're
itself.
talking about What Just Happened.
Yes, What Just Happened.
Our cameras died here.
I couldn't remember that title.
What Just Happened is Barry Levinson directed that,
Right.
and I think it's Art Linson's, who's a producer, sort of. And I didn't see that one. So
that's interestingly.
I can't comment.
It's interestingly insightful as well because it's based on the guy's memoirs
Right.
about what he went through. Art Linson's memoirs, and so that's an interesting one. There's also De Niro's played director several times.
Guilty by Suspicion is worth talking about because I think that even though it's Guilty by Suspicion is a De Niro movie that's kind of been forgotten now, but it's about the blacklist and McCarthyism. But even though it's not mainly about the industry, the moments of it that are about the industry ring very true. And De Niro is, to me, he plays the total opposite of the kind of director that O'Toole plays in Stuntman.
Right.
It's the humble, calm, quiet workman director, but I think he nails the performance.
Totally.
So,
and it actually should be. I totally forgotten it, but it needs to be in this list because it deals with something that occasionally happens, and that is when politics and the film industry somehow interlock.
Yeah.
You know, the one with De Niro again and Dustin Hoffman. That also does it. I can't think of that title. What's that one? David Mamet wrote it.
De Niro and Dustin Hoffman?
Yes, and De Niro plays. They said Hoffman sort of plays the kid the kid stays in the picture.
He plays Robert Evans.
Yeah, he sort of plays a riff on Robert Evans. It takes place in Washington D.C.
Wag the Dog.
Wag the Dog. Yes, that's the one. Yeah, like that because it connects. And every so often that happens, and it happened big time with the blacklist. There were novels written about it. Another one is what's the one Woody Allen did where he plays
The Front.
The Front. Yes. That also intersects with that, and that is very definitely a part of Hollywood's history. Probably a shameful part of Hollywood history, but a part of Hollywood history. There is also a film called The Wild Party, and it stars James Coco and Raquel Welch. And it's a riff in a certain way on the Fatty Arbuckle situation without directly confronting it.
That's interesting.
And so that's an interesting film of Hollywood on Hollywood. You know? Almost all the films you're talking about, aren't necessarily great films. But they do give some insight into what we really thought of, particularly the studio period, as the fabulous industry.
Right.
Because they called it the dream factory. And they were talking about the end result because working within the system was not necessarily a dream. But the end result gave us a wonderment of the world that we never knew. And the studio created in Hollywood sort of an Olympus that they protected I mean, when the stars told their stories through their biographies, you realize their lives were as ordinary, as boring, as mundane as ours are. But the studio protected it, the stars seemed like golden figures.
Yeah.
There was a point there where if you were a studio star, particularly female, even if you went outside to throw your garbage out, they would insist that you wear certain clothing.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that if a photographer happened to
keep
catch
up a
you,
certain image,
a certain glamour
Yeah.
aspect to it. You know, Joan Crawford was really the actress that bought into that big time, you know, like that. And it was even said that a lot of the garbage, to make it look pretty, was cut up paper, pretty paper that they put at top of it, you see. So that's how far they went to create that
ridiculous.
image. Yeah.
The other, and just to throw out another one, is I think that, you know, elements of one of our cameras' battery's dead, so we'll just roll off of this one.
Okay.
Is The Aviator.
Yes, I thought of that.
Because it's not about the industry.
Right.
But again, the parts of it that are,
right,
he nails.
Yes.
And it makes you want to see Scorsese do a film
right.
that's just about
the
movies.
industry. Because he knows it so. He knows
it better than
yes.
probably anyone
yes.
working, I would say. Better than Bogdanovich, I think.
Yeah. I don't know that. I mean, as a filmmaker, he could realize it.
He's also,
as well.
But he might be, because I don't know if Bogdanovich knows the foreign cinema as well as Scorsese does. But
I don't know that either.
Because Bogdanovich is so focused on the directors like Ford and Hawks and Wells.
What I like about Bogdanovich is his affection for it.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's a deep love. You know, that really I think is wonderful.
Another oddball one. And I'd like to see more movies made like this. It's not a great movie, but Shadow of the Vampire is the movie about the making of Murnau's Nosferatu.
Yes, Nosferatu.
And Willem Dafoe plays the vampire, the actor who plays the vampire, but they're saying that he really was a vampire, and John Malkovich plays the director. It doesn't completely come off, but it's quirky and it's fun. And
it's interesting. I saw it not long ago. It was on TV. Yeah. And one of the things I really liked about it was the cinematography, the black and white cinematography of it. It gives you a ghostly feeling.
Yes.
And when you're watching it one-on-one, the way I was, it's eerie. It's an eerie experience. That's one of those films, you know, I always think of film as a collective experience. And I've had joyful experiences watching a movie in the theater with an audience. But occasionally you come across a picture that's really meant to be seen alone.
Yeah.
And The Shining was one of those for me.
Yeah, totally.
And also this one, Shadow of a Vampire. Yeah. Because when I saw it in the theater, I was a little indifferent to it. When I saw it alone here in the house, and it was about 11 o'clock at night, I was creeped out by it.
Maybe I'll have to reinvestigate because I haven't seen it since I saw it.
The mood is there.
Now one I haven't seen, but I was going to ask you if you've seen, because I've been curious about it for a long time, is because we haven't talked about black cinema at all. Badass. Have you seen Badass?
No, I haven't seen
about the making of Melvin.
Yes, I've heard of it. No, I've not seen it. But I'll tell you the one. Who is it that made it? Robert. It's about black stereotyping, and I can't think of the name of the film. I used to show it in class. And it's about filmmaking and an independent thing, and he goes and he maxes out his credit cards to shoot this thing, and it's all stereotype scenes of how blacks are stereotyped in the movie, and it made some money. It did well. And he went on to make a few films. He was a comic actor, and I can't think of his name right now. You just mentioned it, and so that brought it to mind. At another day, I'll bring up. I'll look it up and I'll find out.
In a second, I want to ask you what your favorite movie about movies is, right? But first, I want to throw one more out. This is my ultimate guilty pleasure of movies about movies, and I think it's it's a good film. Is Bowfinger. Now, I enjoy this film.
Yes.
I think it's not Woody Allen. What am I saying? Eddie Murphy's last good movie.
Yes.
I'll give him credit. He might return.
Yes, I think Eddie Murphy is a wonderful actor that just hasn't been given given the right opportunity
or
to
hasn't
shine.
taken the right opportunity
either
in
way,
recent years.
because there was a point there where I was looking at his career and I was thinking, this guy is batting on all cylinders. I mean, he's really striking, terrifically well, but the roles aren't there for him to realize his full potential as an actor, not a comic. But as an actor, like that, I like that a lot. And Bowfinger.
And Bowfinger is just pure fun,
right?
And and believe, however ridiculous it is, when I'm on set, I find myself thinking about Bowfinger. You know what I mean? Like, I find myself. And he goes and gets the Mexicans from across the border to be his crew, and I don't know how many times I've thought, I want to fire my whole crew and go to Home Depot and get all these Mexicans to come in. But anyway, that's a good one. But what's your favorite? If you could pick one that's either your favorite or you think it's
easy. Singing in the Rain.
Okay.
I think Singing in the Rain, it satirizes Hollywood, but it does it with such accuracy and so much real. I mean, it's what good satire is. The exaggeration is there, but it's not so absurd. I've actually seen and read about people who behave the way that Gene Kelly behaves as a star once and Lena Lamont behaves, and the studio bosses and everything else. And so for me, it is the Hollywood film about Hollywood. Even just the footage of him walking across the locations and watching them shooting a Western over there, watch a jungle picture over here, an army picture over here, so that they can get to that set. It's the best depiction of the Dream Machine as they were.
Well, I thought it was interesting, just that whole walking from set to set thing. I was recently reading that Bogdanovich's Alan Dwan interview, and Alan Dwan was one of the earliest film directors, really. He worked from the silent era up until the 1950s, so he covered like pretty much the entire studio period. And he was talking about even in the silent days, they'd be back to back, jungle scene, Western scene, this scene, and even then, even though it was silent, they would out of courtesy, the person next door would be quiet so that the actors could focus, most of the time, which I thought was really, really interesting. But Singin' in the Rain is good. My favorite is, like we mentioned before, Hearts of the West, which is about making movies making westerns in the early days, and it kind of crosses over between the silent and sound period. But Jeff Bridges is in it, and Andy Griffith.
Wonderful.
Jeff Bridges plays. He says, "I'm a Western writer," right? And he's this naive kid who comes out, and he wants to become a Western writer in California, or in Nevada originally, stumbles onto a movie set, becomes a stuntman. Andy Griffith is an older, wise stuntman with a nice little secret that I won't reveal. But the best part of the movie for me is Alan Arkin as the director, because I think O'Toole might be one of the best directors on screen, but Alan Arkin is so funny as the director in this. And again, I see myself in him. He's telling these two actors they're fighting. He's like, sock him, hit him here, and then they do it wrong, and he goes, "You're an idiot, you're apes." You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden the actors look like, okay, we'll walk off the set, and he goes, "Please, one more take, please."
Well, one of the things that Alan Arkin as a comic actor, and he's more than a comic actor, is there was something very low key and subtle. And when you contrast him to what O'Toole did, O'Toole is the opposite. He's large, he's flamboyant. But what's his name thing was always very subtle, and in that performance, his subtlety is wonderful. The suggestions that he makes to motivate the actors, etc. And so that's it. While we're talking, Inside Daisy Clover. Robert Redford. It stars Robert Redford, Natalie Wood, and to me the best performance in the picture and the most insightful is Christopher Plummer. He plays the producer of the studio. She's sort of a variation on a grown-up Judy Garland crossed with Shirley Temple. And Robert Redford is a young sort of effete star that they've put together for this picture. And Plummer plays this producer, and what he portrays really is all the things a producer has to be. He has to be a bully. He has to be a dictator. He has to be a father figure. He has to be a seducer. He has to be a lover. He has to be a beggar. He has to be all these things. And Plummer's performance is so mercurial that he embraces all of it. And I remember the first time I saw the picture, I thought, I have to see this again just to watch that performance. It's wonderful. And of course, he was never, ever in any way by the critics or especially the award people even pointed out for it.
Okay, I'll have to see it. That sounds really interesting.
He is interesting in that. The other film that I like for the insight into the business, flawed as it is, it's really flawed too, is The Last Tycoon.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of the Hollywood politics is in there, and not the surface stuff with the union problems, but the things like, for me, one of my favorite scenes is when De Niro, playing a variation really on Irving Thalberg, who was the inspiration for the role, goes in and fires the director because the star who's played by Jean Moreau, is throwing tantrums, and he says, "You're not getting the best out of her." And the guy says, "Well, I'll finish up today." And he says, "No, we want you to finish now."
Yeah.
And as soon as they walk outside, he says, "Well, what about my briefcase?" And De Niro says, as a character, he says, "It's in the car already." In other words, they'd had it all done, and a new director is picking up the picture right where you left
That's
off.
how they did it.
Yes, that's exactly how they did it, like that. Another film that I didn't list that is interesting and hasn't played around, and I don't even know if it must be available on DVD somewhere, is The Loved One.
Yeah.
And that is
from,
Evelyn Waugh's book.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is interesting too.
Find.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's an interesting film about Hollywood on Hollywood. I also listed.
But hold on. I know you got books to talk about,
Sure.
but you did not talk about one of your favorite movies,
Which
Gus,
one?
Sullivan's Travels.
Oh, well.
You didn't bring up Sullivan's
I didn't even.
Travels. That's totally about the industry.
I know, and you know it's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
It's a blind spot. Talk about it.
No, I haven't. I don't know it as well as you do because you're a Preston Sturges fan.
Yes,
Let me just tell you, he quotes this movie like compulsively.
No, it's too much for me to talk about, really. But you are right. But it is one of the best.
Yeah.
I would, for Preston Sturges, the reason I'm not going into it is because I would have to do an entire session on Preston Sturges
we'll
alone.
Cover him.
One day, because his stuff is so extraordinary. It's like 8.5,
right?
In the sense, but the breadth of what he does and his wit. He was the greatest satirist motion pictures ever had. And I'd have to go into too much with Sullivan's Travels.
Well, talk about some of the books that you were going
to mention. Couple of the books I mentioned, first of all, I said unmade from novels. There were novels that begged to be made into films. 2 are by Bart Schulberg.
Okay.
One is What Makes Sammy Run. And again, Ben Stiller is now talking about it. That book was written when I was a kid, and every so often it would come up that somebody's going to make a movie of this, and for whatever reason in the old studio terms, they could never find a way to, in quotes, lick the script.
Yeah.
They made a TV movie of it in the 50s. Okay. It wasn't a TV movie, it was a TV special, which was about an hour long. And then they did a Broadway musical of all things of it. I saw the musical about 3 times, which kind of picks up a little bit of it. And that's it. But periodically, and once again, it's supposedly on somebody's front burner. And I saw a write-up about 6 months ago where Ben Stiller says he thinks he's got the right script for it.
Okay.
And he's looking to do it.
Huh.
The second one is also by Bart Schulberg, and that is The Disenchanted.
You've talked about this.
And that's a wonderful book, and it really is based on a trip he took with Scott Fitzgerald, and how he tried to keep Scott Fitzgerald from the bottle, simply to write the screenplay for one of those ice skating movies that they were fond of. It was a genre during the 30s. And so he spins off this fiction on it, but it's so insightful about Hollywood, because Bart Schulberg's father was the head of a studio.
Okay.
He was the head of Paramount Pictures. Okay. And so Schulberg grew up in that industry.
Yeah.
And it's really quite a good book. And they made a play of it, Broadway play, called The Disenchanted, and it's the role that brought Jason Robards Jr. into leading roles. He played the role on Broadway. This is in the 50s when I was still in high school. And from then on, because up until then he had not even been in movies, but he had been viewed as, because of his oddball looks, as somebody who could play supporting roles, not leads, not romantic leads.
Yeah.
And his performance in The Disenchanted on stage led Hollywood producers to giving him romantic lead roles. That's the one. And then the last one of the three, there are multiple books about Hollywood, is Norman Mailer's The Deer Park.
Okay.
A very difficult book. I'm reading it again. I've read it about 3 times. I really liked the book. The book, when it came out, its initial publisher refused to publish it because he said it was too sexually explicit. Reading the book now, you laugh at that.
Yeah.
But it's a work that Mailer never left alone. He reworked it. He worked it as a play in 99 scenes that counts backwards.
Okay.
Then when I was at his home in Provincetown, me and some other people were taken through his study. And one of the things I found, and I was dying to ask them to let me have a copy of it, but I didn't dare. I lacked the courage, although I knew the people involved, is he has a screenplay of it.
Okay.
And I thought, gosh, I'd like to see what he did as a screenplay for that. Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
And the screenplay was about, I picked it up and I leafed through it. It was about 256 pages, I think. And so those are the books that have not been made into movies that are still waiting. And I think somebody like Scorsese, that's what you
could
talk
do
about.
It, yeah.
Or Bogdanovich.
And they really should do it. I wish that they would do it for HBO.
Yes.
And do like a 10, 12 episode miniseries,
right.
Something like that.
Where they could get into it. They did some of that with Garson Kanan's book. Garson Kanan wrote a book about Hollywood, and Tony Curtis played David O. Selznick.
Okay.
Things like that. I can't remember the name of the book. But they did it as a miniseries, but it was for NBC. It wasn't very good. Yeah, unfortunately. But I think for some place like HBO, it could be a lot better with one of these books.
Yeah.
Because they're all big books, by the way. They're not, small books. Most of them are at least 200, 300 pages.
Okay.
With Mailer's book, it's 500.
Yeah. One of the movies that may be one of the greatest movies about movies we haven't seen is Orson Welles' unfinished film.
Yes, I was going to talk about
The Other Side
that.
of the Wind, which is about a director. And there's, John Huston plays the director. And it was one of Orson Welles' unfinished projects. He has a few, but it seems to be the closest to being finished.
Right.
And it's a rights issue. It's mainly a rights issue that this thing's been held up for years, and Bogdanovich is still trying to get it released. Right. And who knows if we'll ever see it. I challenge someone in the era of people. We're in the era of leaking things.
Yes.
I challenge someone to steal the movie and leak it. Because to me, the public, it belongs to the public. It belongs to people like us who love Wells and want to see it. It doesn't belong on someone's shelf. So I challenge someone out there to steal it and leak it on the internet. And then once it's out there, it will always be out there.
Yeah.
They can shut it down, but someone
they can't take it back. Yes.
That's me.
Well, I just finished that book I showed you last week, Wells in Italy. And reading it and all the other Wells books that I've read, what I've picked up is that the character that Jacob Hansford is the character's name, that the director that he creates, seems to me, and this is what fascinates me, seems to be a cross between Wells himself, Ernest Hemingway, and I would think Captain Ahab from Moby Dick.
Interesting.
2 real people and a fictional character. Right? Because one, Moby Dick is a role, Captain Ahab is a role that Wells, for all his career, wanted to do.
Yeah.
He was in the Gregory Peck version of it where he played the priest.
Yeah.
He also wrote a stage adaptation of it that he did in England where he played Ahab. And so from what I could glean out of what I've read, the character is a conflation of these 3 people, probably with others as well. That's what fascinates me. I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
Plus, John Huston had his own persona that was larger than life that he couldn't help to bring to any role he played.
Yeah.
You see? And so I'd love to see that for that reason.
And we could probably go on forever, but
Yes.
you just saying John Huston, you just reminded me of a movie I watched 2 weeks ago with my grandfather, White Hunter, Black Heart.
Yes.
Which is where Clint Eastwood's movie, one of his best and maybe his most underrated picture,
Right.
where he plays Houston during the making of
African Queen.
And it's another movie that doesn't, like Sunset Boulevard, not in the same way at all. It's not directly about the industry because it's more about the
personalities.
Yeah,
yes.
But I like a lot of it, and it has some really funny moments that deal with industry
And again,
stuff.
as you're talking, it just occurred to me, another film that gives you some insight into the creative aspect or the egos of the creative people is Barefoot Contessa.
Okay.
I
haven't seen that.
Bogart plays the director in that.
Yeah.
And Edmund O'Brien, I think that's where he got his Academy Award, plays a theatrical agent. And Warren Stevens, one of my favorite actors, who has never gotten the kind of reputation I thought he should have gotten, is very good in that. And so that's another film. So we could go on forever with this list.
Totally.
The one thing I would like to say to anyone, I have them, where did I put them? The 3 books that I like, and I'll show them because they are, if anybody's interested, 2 by Bogdanovich. This is the one called Who the Devil Made It. And it's a series of interviews with directors from what we call the golden age of cinema. And anyone who is interested in that, there's Robert Aldrich, George Cukor, Alan Dwan, your man, Hawks, your man again, Hitchcock, and it goes on, Sidney Lumet, Fritz Lang, Otto Preminger, Don Siegel.
It's a great book.
Yes, that's one. The other Bogdanovich book is Who the Hell's in It? And this is from the actor's perspective. And so there's Bogart, there's Brando, Cagney, Ben Gazzara, Lillian Gish, Cary Grant. There's all of those. One of my favorites about the studio system is a book I use for my favorite class in all the years. I taught at ASU 24 years, and I taught film for 20 of those 24 years. And the favorite class I ever had was the studio system. And the book I used was this book. It's called The Glamour Factory. I used this as a text, and the students everybody had to buy a copy. And at the end, they loved it so much, they all said they were going to keep their copies simply because it reads like a novel and it takes you into that never world of what was Hollywood. The last thing I'll say about books is there's so many biographies and autobiographies of stars. I always feel that there should be a bookstore called the Biography Bookstore, a celebrity biography bookstore that only houses that, and there should be a library. And of the ones I've read, and I've read hundreds, my favorite is Janet Leigh's, and it's called There Really Was a Hollywood.
Interesting.
And she embraces and she explains all of that world quite well.
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I liked it
I'll have to read that. I didn't realize that was your favorite of those.
Yeah, of those.
One day I want to talk about, we don't have time to talk about documentaries about movies, but there's some really interesting documentaries about movies, so we should cover documentaries, period, but specifically that movies like Heart of Darkness and Burden of Dreams and some of that stuff gets really interesting, so we'll talk about that at some point. What actor are we doing next?
No, it's your turn. You get
It's my turn? Okay,
yes.
Let's do William Holden.
Okay, the man I've met.
So there you go. You'll save that story for our episode. So thank you for watching. I hope you you can fill your Netflix queue now with tons of movies to watch.
We told you, Hollywood on Hollywood.
Right.
Or film and films.
That's right. We'll see you next week.
Yes. Bye.